Hi, this is Jim Rivas, and welcome to my session at the Cloud Trust Summit 2024. There's been some real terrific presentations here, and I really begged my team to let me join in. I'm not as worthy as some of the others, but I had sort of an important awareness message, and I think it's pretty important, and I'd love to get your feedback on what I want to talk about. So, the subject that I am going into and what I've called this is to do SOC 2 and ISO 27001 the right way with CSA STAR. Because I find that there seems to be some awareness gaps and lack of understanding on what we have developed that are very complementary and leverage these two very important conformance frameworks. And I think that you can just have better, more efficient compliance and assurance. And I'm talking really across the board to organizations that are adopting cloud providers of all types, from large infrastructure providers to SaaS companies, to the different people in the assurance community, auditors, internal auditors, external certification bodies. And so I hope you enjoy the presentation that I'm doing here, and I hope that you'll let me know feedback on questions you might have, and we'll have some other experts here helping me out with that. So again, thanks very much for participating in this, and let me know what you think. So let's get into it. So what we want to cover is we want to provide sort of this overview of cloud assessment, how it works with these different frameworks, where what they mean, and then how it relates to what we're doing. Want to really make sure we understand how cloud has evolved and its complexity, how the modern applications are delivered, and why that really means it's very important that your compliance is very tailor-made to the situations that you have at hand. I want to make sure I cover for you how CSA has optimized SOC 2 and ISO 27001 for the cloud. And there's a lot of tools out there. Some of them you know of, some of them you may not know of. And so I want to make sure that we're covering that for you. And then share a little bit of use cases out there, some of the information we're getting back from the community on how their journey has been in using this STAR level 2, what it is, and how they've used it. So we are going to cover these programs. So I'm going to start with talking about both ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2. I'll be referring to it as SOC 2, but you'll know that's what I'm meaning is the Type 2, not the Type 1. And then I'll talk through some different issues around that and considerations around cloud assurance sort of writ large. And then I'm going to go into some of more of the specifics of the CSA STAR program and how it relates to that. So let's start with the AICPA SOC 2 and give you a little background on that. So this was developed by AICPA for service organizations. So you can think back, if you've been around for a while, to its forerunner, SAS 70. And that was developed in 1992 for auditing information security controls. And in 2010, something called SSA 16 was created that had some different levels of this. And it replaced SAS 70 with SOC 2. And the internal controls for trust services criteria were articulated. And that's the next bullet. We're talking about security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So that's been, I think, very well accepted. There were some modifications in 2017. And so the current version of this is SSA 18. And that was basically helping. There were some ambiguities that were addressed there. So this is really the service providers in traditional IT environments, assuming there's a lot of on-premises data, and it's been evolved to have more cloud-specific things, but it's not something that is only for cloud. It's used for a lot of other types of service providers. So it's important to know that SOC 2 reports, they're restricted use reports and they cannot be released publicly. I could tell you some stories about organizations that had their SOC audit that inadvertently sent the report to Cloud Security Alliance, and there was some emergency to make sure we weren't going to post them inadvertently, which we weren't, but that's definitely information that's very sensitive. So you can check out the official site there to get more information. So let's talk a little bit about ISO IEC 27001. So this comes from a very long heritage, very esteemed heritage from British Standard BS 7799. So the ISO 27001 first version was published in 2005, a couple of revisions in 2013 and 2022. And this was designed for traditional IT environments, focusing on very comprehensive information security management systems. And it's the gold standard, I would think. I wouldn't argue with that at all. And it's applicable to any type of organization. So it's not just for IT companies, not for cloud service providers. It could be for any type of company. And in fact, if you go look at all the ISO 27001 certificates have been released, there's financial institutions, there's all sorts of industries that are involved that for whatever reason, it's important for them to get this certificate. Very similar and parallel to the AICPA SOC 2, the certificates are produced and those are very short, but the audit reports are confidential. And there again is the official site for you to go ahead and take a look at that. So we looked at very early on when we were starting to create our own control frameworks that were very specific to cloud on, do we need to create our own processes, frameworks, our own conformance framework for how you would do auditing in cloud? And we came back and said, absolutely no, that the ISO tools and the AICPA was SAS 70 at the time, they were terrific. They were doing everything they needed to do. And so for what they were designed for, they were fine. And we didn't need to reinvent the wheel and create our own completely new audit framework and processes and procedures. So we're big fans of ISO and AICPA. That's one thing I want to make sure that I communicate right off the bat here. So those are good tools. And they're actually focused on the right job to provide this assurance and compliance in the cloud. But we think they have the wrong use in many cases. And I'm going to provide more details about what I mean by that. So when you think about all of the investment that we are making in compliance and assurance in cloud and information security programs, how much they have to spend on this writ large, it's really important that what we do in terms of audit and assurance matches where the real risks are, and that we are very mindful about addressing areas where there might be gaps. And so one thing that's very important, which I'm going to be hammering home, is this: we need that well understood scope of applicability. Otherwise, different audits, different certifications can have very different results and different perspectives. It's also very important to understand that the modern SaaS applications, they're complex in that you have an infrastructure provider, you may have a lot of other services that are mashed up into a single business application, a single cloud SaaS application that's delivered. So it can be a lot of players, a lot of vendors, a lot of different technologies that make their way into it. And now, of course, we have generative AI. And so certainly what is there can be something that we need to make sure that our overview, our oversight, and the controls that we are examining and potentially improving, that we are comprehensive for the job at hand and for the actual technology that we're using. So it's really important that each actor understand their security responsibility and they understand in context how to relate their security responsibility, their dependencies with the other components that are out there and the other companies that deliver those components. We call this shared security responsibility. And again, that's something that I'm going to be talking about quite a bit, and including some of the new offerings, research offerings, including some things just this week that we've released and delivered there. So what we need to do is we need to marry the assessments and those conformance frameworks that I've already introduced to you with a native cloud controls framework that articulates like the control objectives, that responsibility, and very, very importantly, provides the transparency that's needed. So if you look, that little section of text might be a little bit hard to read that's on the bottom right. I just wanted to harken back. So this was our very first guidance in 2009. And we were actually seeing this as an issue back then. And it's been a journey, and we've done a lot of work over the years to address these gaps, and we are continuing to do that. So it's not something that should be a big surprise the way I'm describing and framing this. So then go into that scope of an audit. When you think about scoping, we're thinking about the people, process, technologies that interact and could impact the security of a system. So we want to make sure that we are including them in how we think about an audit. So it's creating those boundaries. So, what's really important is that we have the right amount of due care, and that there's an understanding between the auditor and the target of that audit, what we are trying to accomplish, make sure we really understand the systems and the usage of them to make sure that that scope of applicability is not deficient. So we want to be too broad, we don't want to be too narrow, we want to be just right to make sure that we get the correct results. We don't want vulnerabilities, control weaknesses to go undetected because we just didn't feel that was in scope. And it's important to understand that it's typically if the auditors are going to determine the controls that they're going to test, and it's good to have that sort of understanding between the two parties. So transparency is obviously really important, and there's the phrase of don't do security by obscurity. But it's really important when you are a cloud customer, and maybe in previous generations it was all on premise, you had it all in your purview, that now the more transparency we have is really useful in the evaluation and in the procurement phase and in the continued usage of that cloud service to really understand how it operates. And this applies to security, probably most of all. That comes up even outside of our industry in evaluation of technologies you're buying. Well, what about the security? So a lot of customers, larger enterprise customers, they've created their own supply chain management, their own third-party vendor assessment. And historically, they would create their own company-specific assessment questionnaires for security. That certainly has become untenable, just the scale, the millions and millions of customers that cloud providers often have. They can't answer those for everyone. So people, I think, by and large, have understood we've got to use some standards for assessment questionnaires, and then look at what's the delta of other things that we need to analyze and understand. And so that's where CSAs come in to a large degree. It's really important to have that transparency. There's always that concern about, well, I can't be transparent about my security to a degree that the hackers will find ways to get into our systems. And that's never the intention, and honestly never the result of being more transparent about your security practices. There's a lot of ways that hackers can find out about, hey, what systems are you using, all those sorts of things. I've seen them go on LinkedIn and look at employees, sorts of experiences with companies, and you can kind of figure out what sorts of technologies they're using. So transparency is just crucial, and we need to continue to go down this path. So the importance of the shared security responsibility model was something that I wanted to talk about next. So one way of putting it that our team talks about is that the service provider, they're responsible for security of the cloud, while the customers are responsible for security in the cloud, or what they do with the cloud, might be another way of putting it. So it's really important that cloud security posture being high assurance, it really depends on the service providers and the customers understanding that shared security responsibility. What's the provider responsible for? What am I responsible for? Where are there's things that we're both responsible for? There's a dependency between us, and there's maybe a lot more of those than you would know. So service customers, they need to be updated, and these things are very dynamic and they change. So you need to know that, very important, and that very important factor of just the dynamic nature and change management and updates and patches and all those sorts of things become really important. So let's understand, and let's all commit to that shared responsibility, and I've heard people say shared fate, we're all in this together, is really important. And we commit to that, and we commit to really diving deep onto a control objective level to understand what shared responsibility really means and what we need to do about it. So now I want to go into that third framework that I was talking about, and that's the CSA STAR. So the STAR program is something that's been around for a long time. 2011, it was when we started, have over 2,500 registered provider entries. We have countries that have adopted this. Several, I think of one that we talk about a fair amount is in Italy. The government there uses STAR as a requirement for cloud providers to provide their services to the government ministries, anything public administration. Several other countries like that. And it's something that a lot of enterprises, they require a STAR entry before they'll do business. And we see this referenced in a lot of different industries, a lot of different sectors, a lot of different countries around the world. So we're very proud of that adoption. So there's 6 pillars here. It's very comprehensive. A lot of people think about, hey, you just create a control framework and kind of it's magical and everything else happens. But there's a lot of work that you need to be doing to have that whole community of auditors, assessors, education, technology integration as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be just drilling down a little bit on 3 areas. The main area is this assessment portfolio, and help you understand level 2. That's the third party assessment, which all major audit firms, ISO certification bodies can perform these STAR assessments, the level 2. Going to talk about the cloud controls matrix, which is sort of the heart of this. You can't do it without that. And then we'll reference a little bit of the STAR registry itself. So that'll be the area of focus here. So let's start with Cloud Controls Matrix. So we actually, I think, first released this in 2010. So this is sort of the industry standard for a set of cloud control objectives. And we have 197 controls, and there's the 17 domains there. Integrated with this is what we call our CAKE questionnaire, which has the questions that assessors use to determine the validity and the presence of controls that meet those control objectives, those 197 control objectives. So this talks about the applicability on different areas, different architecture, from a physical data center all the way up to the application. We look at it by the roles within an organization and that the different relevance there, and we have a lot of different sort of derivative tools in terms of implementation of controls and that shared security responsibility that I'll be talking about as well. So again, a lot of you are really familiar with this. People on this summit, I think, are, but it's good to kind of sort of level set that this is really the heart of what we have developed. So STAR Level 2, again, doing SOC 2 and ISO 27001 the right way. What this is the third-party assessment aspect of Level 2 is something that has different iterations. So what we call STAR attestation is the SOC 2, which we've enhanced with Cloud Controls Matrix and specific guidelines. STAR certification is ISO 27001, which we've enhanced with Cloud Controls Matrix and again, some other specific prescriptive guidance on how you do that. So level 1 is our self-assessment. And our self-assessment is something that independently of this, an organization can fill out the entire questionnaire and describe their controls, and then it gets published. And so what's interesting here is that for someone to qualify as a level 2, not only they got to do this third-party assessment, the STAR attestation, the STAR certification, but they also have to have a companion self-assessment that is published on our registry. So self-assessment, you could say, well, there's definitely weaknesses there compared to a third-party attestation, and we'd agree there's issues there and differences that you only can get by having those experienced auditors. However, that has to be published and that's where the transparency comes in. And so it becomes a very good companion for people who want to make sure that cloud providers are doing the right thing with having that third-party assessment, but that you can also examine the controls in detail, which is often that issue that I was talking about earlier. It's getting an auditor report for one of these assessments as a consumer from someone there. That's maybe they'll do that under NDA if you're a very large customer, but it's very hard to get a hold of. So we think this is like a very critical solution, innovation in the industry, the way we've structured this and the way we deliver this. So STAR certification, again, it's ISO 27001 and Cloud Controls Matrix. It uses the Plan, Do, Check, Act approach. It's just completely compliant with all of the ISO requirements you'd expect for a 27001 certification body. The assessors have to be trained and they have to have our CCSK certification, Certificate of Cloud Security Knowledge. We really make sure that they understand the cloud. And so this is structured to do what ISO does, ISMS and continuous improvement, really help make sure that the systems are comprehensive and holistically secure, and done again with that correct scoping with Cloud Controls Matrix. So you see it echoes a lot of similarities with STAR attestation based on SOC 2. We're combining the trust criteria with Cloud Controls Matrix. The CPAs, again, doing this, they have to have our CCSK certification. And we have that mapping between what we're doing with Cloud Controls Matrix, both with ISO and as well with the trust criteria. And so this is really making sure that a SOC 2, again, really has very granular cloud security controls that are well understood and to create some real consistency across the SOC 2s that you would see. So that's the real advantage of having STAR attestation. So again, to look at both of them, we would say this is, if you take level 2 and CCM, it's addressing those cybersecurity risks. It's providing the real cloud enhanced security control objectives to mitigate those risks. And I'll get into a little bit more of the shared security responsibility in some following slides, but this is really the way to just lock down how ISO and SOC 2, which were made to be very universal and very flexible, to lock them down to the cloud environment for you. So mention the registry a little bit that you need to have that level one, for example, but you can go take a look at it and there's the URL. What you'll find is that you have all the hyperscalers, leading cloud security companies, a lot of SaaS providers, many more. They've actually achieved this star level two, and just showing I did a screenshot of a few of them. You'll see, and you can go drill down and you can verify like, who was their auditor for the star level two. Was it a certification? Was it an attestation? And then you can also drill down and look at their level one and understand their responses on a control by control basis. So it's very rich information that's like very helpful. But it gets better than that. So the level two cloud providers, because they're required to have that self-assessment, and it's a little bit, I know, of an eye test, so I tried to blow it up here at the bottom, is you can see how the cloud providers implemented it, and you can see what they believe the responsibilities are. And this is for an encryption control, for example. So you can look at that, understand what you're supposed to do. But something we've released only this week is this very detailed CCM implementation guideline, is a voluminous document of the shared security responsibility model. And this is the same control that was shown in that previous CAKE assessment document that shows here's the guidance on here's what you should expect for this control. And this one's a dependency that, yeah, the cloud provider in this case has the encryption libraries, but it's the cloud customer that actually has to go implement that to actually do the encryption that needs to be happening. So this is how you actually do security right and make sure your partners are doing security right in the cloud. And then it's going to stand the test of the audit, internal, external. So if you break this down by stakeholder, so from a enterprise cloud consumer perspective, if you're an enterprise out there today and wanting to understand this, what I would say is instead of asking for a SOC 2 from your cloud service provider, ask for a STAR attestation, because then you essentially get both. And by the same token, instead of asking for an ISO 27001 certificate, ask for a CSA STAR certification. Again, you're getting both. Then use that companion STAR level one self-assessment and that CCM implementation guideline to really assure that the cloud service meets your exacting requirements and to understand the additional steps you must take to really lock it down. If you're a cloud service provider, work with your auditor or your certification body to achieve that STAR level 2. And instead of just a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001, we've actually talked to a lot of different people because it's not two separate full engagements. It's sort of that specific scoping, which can mean some incremental cost difference because we're doing it right. I've heard different numbers, and your mileage may vary, but I've heard some experiences it was like 10 extra hours to make sure we covered cloud controls matrix and the specific requirements. And some, well, they weren't quite ready. There were a lot of questions. Maybe it was more like 50 hours, but it's really the important thing to understand. It's marginal, incremental, and important costs that you would incur to provide this one engagement that sort of meets both of these needs. So if you're an auditor or a certification body, go ahead and offer a STAR level 2 instead of just the more vanilla SOC 2 or ISO 27001 for your cloud service provider customers, because you'll be differentiated in the market and you're just going to be providing a more appropriate solution. So just to sum it up, 27001 SOC 2, they're terrific. We love it. We could not have done what we've done without the AICPA and ISO having these conformance frameworks. However, you have this risk of the inappropriate scope of applicability. The shared security responsibility can be unclear, and we lack that transparency. STAR level 2 is the answer to all of that. So the other tools that we have, make sure you understand that. use the registry, use not just the cloud controls matrix, but our more detailed implementation guidelines, and then just really dig into that STAR level 1 as a complement to what we've developed here. So let's do SOC 2 and ISO 27001 the right way with CSA STAR. So I hope this has been useful to you. I hope that you've learned some things. I would really love to hear your feedback on questions, concerns, anything about this. It's an important area for all of us. So thank you very much.